All right. Okay, so we are in chapter 4 and 5 of James. It has been a good month. It's been a long month, but it's been a good one. So, as you can see, I keep flipping this thing around. So we're going to hop in with the guys here in just a minute. We're not doing the teaching part tonight. We're kind of on a bit of a time crunch. And so what we're going to do is we're going to talk about 4 and 5 tonight. And then we will, tomorrow or Tuesday night, I will hop on and we'll teach it as a part of it. So, we're going to hop on with the guys, just kind of talk to it, to kind of walk through what these chapters, kind of some things that stood out to them. And then we'll see kind of where we differ or agree or disagree or anything. It's always fun to kind of see where we end up in conversation. So let's hop in. Oh, let me fix this real quick. There we go. Let me hop in with the guys. Let me know if you're here. Let me know if you're watching. We appreciate you as always stopping by and hanging out. So let me get that, and then let's head over with the guys. All right, what's up, gentlemen? How are y'all?
Hello.
Pretty good. How you doing?
Good. Okay, so like I said, the thing we're going to walk through James at 4. I'll teach it later, but I guess just kind of as a quick. Let me do like a 5-minute rundown. That way, it at least is on here before, in case anybody's watching. So, chapter 1, he kind of starts out. We learn who he is, who he's writing to. Specifically, again, James is Jesus' half brother. He's writing not really to a specific church, but just to people in general. That James is kind of considered a wisdom book, and so it is kind of a New Testament Proverbs per se. And so, chapter 1. He spends a lot of time talking about trials and temptations, and in all of these chapters, he starts off specific, and then he kind of moves to a more general teaching as a part of it. And so in chapter 1, he starts off with testing of your faith, the trials that we face, and he moves on to temptation, and then kind of finishes up with being active in our faith and doing good, doing the thing that hearing and doing the word. And then chapter 2 is really going, talks about that to do good, to do faith without works is dead is kind of a big famous statement as a part of it. And it doesn't mean that we're not saved. What it means is that our faith without works is useless. It's inactive. It's dead in the sense of it's not being used for anything. That's kind of the big thought from 2. And the 3, which we talked about last week, is taming the tongue. He starts off with it, specifically talking to leaders and to teachers and what we would call kind of today's world pastors, kind of spiritual leaders. And then he kind of goes on to general statement of wisdom and wisdom comes from God, not from man. So then we move into chapter 4. Chapter 4 and 5 are kind of the same thing. He starts off with something general and then kind of goes a little bit wider. But the first thing he talks about a warning against worldliness. And he's in chapter 4, he's really talking about these quarrels and these kind of fights within the church. We've already seen in chapter 3, he talks about the tongue and how their words can harm. And then chapter 4, he kind of goes on and goes, you guys are fighting and quarreling in the midst of each other. And then he goes on kind of verse 10, he talks about that our goal is to be humble and submit ourselves to the Lord, as he says in verse 7, that is ultimately the goal, to not speak evil to one another. And then really, I would say 13 through 17 can really kind of go into chapter 5 as much as they can chapter 4. But again, kind of a general sense about not being so overconfident with your own ability, your own wealth, and instead being aware that you have what you have because of God, because God is sovereign over all. And then it goes into chapter 5, talking to the rich. And again, he's not saying specifically being rich is bad, but he talks, verse 1, rich, you should weep and howl for the miseries that are coming upon you. Is that he's really referencing specifically that if you are rich, you should be aware that at some point you're going to lose it all, whether in this life or when you die, that all of the things that you boast towards and have and hold such value with, it's all going to go away. And so he's making sure that they understand, again, to go back to verse 10, the humility before God. And he specifically speaks to people who are getting rich based on taking advantage of others And then he goes on and in verse 7, chapter 5 kind of bounces, kind of bookends chapter 1 and 2. He kind of opens the book with trials and temptations. And then he, in chapter 5, verse 7, he kind of goes, okay, well, now sufferings, have patience in suffering. And so he kind of goes through that. And then he ends up, again, talking about something specific in the beginning of chapter 5 with patience and suffering. And then he goes on in something more general with being prayerful in suffering and going to God with it. So, okay, so that's real quick kind of summary and where we are to this. So, let's start with chapter 4. What are some things that stood out? What are some things that you felt like were, that God was kind of challenging you with, or that you hadn't noticed before, or, again, things that kind of stood out. So, what kind of was it for you guys?
I guess I could start. I would say I've got 2 points. One that I'll probably, it's more of a question that I'll ask later when we get into it. But the one thing that stood out to me was this whole referring to them as adulterous people. Um, I thought that was pretty hard hitting. I think whenever I think of adulteress, I think of somebody that, infidelity, somebody that is not necessarily satisfied with where they are in life and are seeking other things. And that's really, I'm assuming he's kind of making that same correlation where we've got God and we're going to God, through prayer, and we're asking him for things for, other things that are not necessarily for God, uh, essentially seeking or asking him to give us things that aren't necessary, or those things that we should be seeking from him. I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, and do you guys feel like you struggle with that periodically? Like, is that something that you guys? And again, obviously, James is speaking very specifically to rich people and this and that. But do you guys feel like that's something that's you look at other people? He talks about envy and he talks about jealousy that we desire. He talks about murder. Again, I'm not teaching through it tonight, but in obviously we don't murder people, but he says if you have anger, Jesus says if you have anger in your heart towards someone, that it's as if you murdered them. That's do you feel like you struggle with that sometimes where we should have a heart for God, but yet we're continually pulled away towards these other things?
Yeah, I would say I struggle. I I struggle with
Absolutely.
that. Especially when it comes to like the job market. I'll be like, God, please, if you give me this job that gives me a lot more zeros behind that paycheck, that means, more that I could, donate to the church, all this kind of stuff.
Mm.
But really, I just wanted more money,
Yeah,
I wanted to be able
Yeah.
to, have a better lifestyle for my family, and I don't know.
that's good. I was
No,
listening
I'm
to a
I'm the same.
podcast. Oh, sorry.
Right.
I was listening to
No,
a podcast this week that specifically talked about that, Corey. That this pastor David Platt was saying, or maybe it's Jay Polduca, and uh, and he was saying that we say, well, we want to be rich so that we can give more away. But the reality is, if you're rich to give away, you're not going to be rich. You're going to be poor. So the reality is, we just want to be rich,
Yeah.
and that we need to have an understanding of our heart as a part of that. That's really good.
no, yeah, I would agree with you, Corey. But I think something that I've noticed, especially over the last maybe 5 or so years, is envy is probably one of my biggest um, things that I try to battle probably. And I think as I've grown older, I think I've some people that I've grown up with or know or something, maybe like the disparity between where like professionally I think that I would love to be and where other people are have grown. Even when you're younger, the gap's not that big, but then as you see other people progress in their career and you feel like you're not, yeah, I think envy is a tough one for me, which is why I have to constantly in my prayer life remind myself of the reasons why I asked for the things that I asked for, because I can really easily get into that, like you're saying, give me that job so that I can donate more and I can do this and that and help other people. And I have to be really mindful of knowing that about myself, that I have to be careful on how I ask that. And when I was actually going through this, Tony Evans had a good quote that he says, how will God's program be advanced through the granting of my request? So just putting in that context of like, well, what if he does grant that request that I'm asking for? How is God's program and how is his, you know, how is he going to be advanced through that, and how is he going to be glorified through that?
That's really
But
good.
yeah, that's a tough one.
I like that. Right? How's God's mission going to be furthered through the request that you have? Hey, it's a good way
Right.
to kind of take the prayer that we have to go, okay, God, is this selfish? And I think that's some of the challenge that people always ask me as a pastor is, well, how do I know that it's God's will, or how do I know this? Some of it is that it's that prayer that you just said.
Yeah.
It's the, you know, God, is this further your mission? And it doesn't mean that we can't have nice things. It doesn't mean that, you know, the Bible doesn't specifically say that being rich is evil, but there's a ton of warnings because wealth comes with a lot of dangers and a lot of complacency, especially spiritually. So that's really good. What about you, Ryan?
So I don't know that James meant this in the way that he phrased the last section of the first, or the last sentence of the first section. You know, he's talking about all these things you should do and how you should live. And like, I feel like sometimes I get in the habit of reading passages like this, and probably others, of like, you know, he's talking about, oh, you need to be humble. I'm like, that's right. Y'all should be humble and y'all should be near to God. Like, man, like thinking about people that I know, you know, like, yeah, that person does have that problem or whatever. And then the very last line is, but who are you to judge your neighbor? And I'm like, dang it.
That's good.
That's what I've been doing this whole time, reading this passage.
That's really good.
But yeah, that was the one thing that kind of stuck out to me. And not that I was really, you know, had anybody in mind or anything, but like I read some of that sometimes and I'm like, oh yeah, we should do that. Those people should do that.
Right,
Or
just
everybody
in
else should do
general.
that.
Like Christians
Yeah,
should be
just like in
more, and
general,
God's
you know?
going, no. I'm speaking to
Man, that's
you
a good
right
word,
now.
brother.
Really you.
Yeah. That's really good. That's really good. For me, it was it was kind of starting with verse 6, but you know, he kind of goes on this thing and he's kind of ripping into these people, you know, the quarrels and the fights, and then you adulterous people. I mean, he's ripping into them and realizing that this is a part of me in my mentality at times. And it talks about in verse 5 that God is jealous for you. And again, I'll teach it tomorrow, Tuesday, but in verse 6, but he gives more grace. And like I highlighted and I underlined and I boxed. I did all the things I could to that thing because, you know, we spent a lot of time this year talking about how that I go through life. My job, I feel like my job or my position is to go through life understanding how lost I am without God. Therefore, my response is humility and grace and thankfulness, and then obedience. And to me, it's this kind of verse that just sticks up. But he gives more grace. That James has just talked about how awful and wretched we are, but even in all of that, God gives more grace. And then he goes to submit yourselves to God, flee, draw near, cleanse your hearts or cleanse your hands, purify your hearts, be wretched, mourn and weep. Let your mouth. He just, to me, that's the verse that I would go to. It says, no, why do I have that mindset about myself and about my standing before God? It's that verse right there to remember who I am without God, so that I can hopefully, in verse 10, be humble before the Lord so that he will exalt you. I think that's such a dangerous line, is that I want God to exalt me. And as a pastor, this is a really tough thing, because I want God to exalt me, because that means I'm being obedient. But I know myself enough to know that when he exalts me, that the temptation for pride and the temptation for arrogance and the temptation for complacency is going to set in. And so it's not unbiblical to want God to bless and give me position and authority and leadership and all those things. But man, I have to come to it humbly, and I have to constantly remind myself of who I am without him, so that I have the right understanding that all this is because of him. Is a huge thing. So, yeah, that's as we've spent a lot of time talking about that with other books. That to me is the set of verses 6 through 9 that just set that to me right on its head.
Yep.
Cool. Okay, so what did y'all think about verse 17? So whoever knows the right thing to do it and fails to do it, for him it is sin. How do you guys feel
That's-
like?
I'll just start to say I'm guilty of that 1,000 times over sometimes. Just like even the little things of you're trying to get the kids down to bed, rushing, it's late, like 30 minutes, maybe an hour past their bedtime. They got school the next morning. Like, no, we'll pray tomorrow.
Mhm.
Even though I know in my head, like, no, maybe we've missed the last couple nights because it's just been a hectic week. No, it needs to be a priority. Things like that, like the little things and then the big things of, I can't think of an example, but I mean, I know there's some, but yeah, I know I'm definitely guilty of that a lot.
Mhm.
It feels like the white lie of sin. It's like
Yeah, that's
you
good.
feel like it's not hurting anybody, but
Mhm.
it is you, and it's hurting others.
That's really
Just
good.
knowing the right thing and not doing it.
What about you, Corey?
I mean, yeah, I don't really have anything to add to that other than I'm super guilty of that.
Yeah, yeah. No, and I think that's me, right? And in James's context, you're dealing with Pharisees that have created all this legalism and extra laws, and Jesus just constantly pushes back on them that it's the heart, it's the heart, it's the heart. And that to me is this: we can get so focused on, well, I look good on the outside, but the reality is, when I know, even if it's self-control, it's humility, it's compassion, it's if my heart isn't right, it's giving back to God financially, time, whole things. If I know the right thing to do and I fail to do it, that for me it's sin. That it's just God's standard is hard, and God's standard is perfection, and I fail it. I fail it constantly, and it's just, yeah. Again, another reminder about it. So
Yeah, I think I like where he positions that, that topic in this little section too, because he's talking about how life is short, and how, don't worry about tomorrow, figure out today, and like all these things. But like the thought of if you know what's right and you don't do it, for him it's sin. It's sin because we don't have a lot of time. Like it's vapor, it's mist. It's I think in other passages there's the Hebrew word hevel that they talk about vapor. But just knowing how fleeting it is, like that moment may never come again, and to know what the right thing to do is and not do it. There's a weightiness behind that. I think when he says it's sin, it's not just a wrong thing to do. It's a missed opportunity.
It's almost like willful disobedience too. Like I know I'm supposed to do it, but I'm not gonna do
Yeah.
it.
right.
Yeah.
I mean, the
How
Bible
many times do I
talks.
get on my kids doing that?
Yes. Right. We talk about sins of commission, right? Sins that we actively
Yeah.
do. But the reality is that God goes, no, it's your heart too. It's sins of omission as well,
Yeah.
which is this specifically. Yeah. And I think that's, and again, the boasting about tomorrow, I think it's a challenge for me, that I get so focused as a kind of a vision person. So kind of my personality is I'm the dreamer, and I think that's one of the things that makes me the kind of leader that I am. Is I'm the guy that wants to think 5, 10, 15 years down the line and wants to figure out how do we get there and that kind of stuff, but not living in that so that I'm missing opportunities now, or so that I'm not trusting the faithfulness of God now, and I'm not relying on Him now as a part of it. So,
So, all right, John, I gotta ask you something. And y'all can make fun of me if you want, but I had a
Never.
question. It's about verses 13. Like I genuinely, I don't think I understand the concept or of what he's like the point he's trying to get across. Like, am I not supposed to like be excited about vacations that are happening in the future? Am I not supposed to be like, you know what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
Yeah,
I'm
that's good.
like I'm confused.
No, that's really good. So no, that's not it, because I mean, Proverbs talks about how that the wise man stores up resources and the foolish person doesn't. So this is one of those where you have to understand the context of all of the Bible so that you can understand James is speaking to one side of it, not both. But I would say the big thing for me is verse 16, where he says, "You boast in your arrogance, all such boasting is evil." So it's as if they're boasting in the sense that they don't need God, they're not relying on God, which is why I think in part this fits in really good with the first part of chapter 5. And in some of the commentaries I was reading, that I think that's why some think that it can be attached to chapter 5, because if you think about the rich and who he's about to specifically speak to, that's what they did was they relied on their resources rather than on God. And so if you're looking at this and you're going, okay, well, I've got plenty, I'm not worried about it. So now I'm not trusting in God. I'm not trusting in his faithfulness. I'm not trusting in him. I'm trusting in myself. That's the boasting about tomorrow to me. As a part of that is how I understand it. That
Yeah.
it's not
Yeah,
looking forward. It's not planning. It's all that's good biblical things that the Bible speaks highly of that. It's that when we get to a point where we go, I don't need God because I've got this taken care of. He goes, no.
Yeah.
You don't control tomorrow. You could die tomorrow.
Yeah.
You don't get to control that.
I kind of read too. I mean, maybe I'm reading too literally into it or figuratively. I don't know, but like, I kind of read it as more of a procrastination. And the thought that came to my mind was like saving for retirement or like 401ks, like trying to set yourself up for retirement, being like, oh, I'll start that 401k when I'm 40. Like, no, do it now. It's like the arrogance to say, I'll do it when I'm 40 and I'll be fine. I'll figure it out. But like, no, like, who knows what's going to happen? And that's when I say when I read that we'll go into such and such a town, spend a year there, trade and make a profit. Like we'll take care of ourselves. We'll just do it later. I'm not going to worry about it right now. Like there's some arrogance there, and that's kind of what I read a little bit
Yeah.
into it.
Interesting.
No, and I think that's kind of fits within the same theme of
Yeah.
I'm looking up my notes here, so that's what I'm typing right now.
Yeah,
Um,
it is taking God as well because you're saying I'll figure it out.
Right. It's doing the same thing of taking advantage, even though it's kind of a different direction. It's still taking advantage of
Right.
going, I don't need to worry about it because I know I've got 80 more years to live in life, when that's not the reality. And I think some of it too, when you think about it, and again in reference to chapter 5, that when you think about it in terms of the rich, right, that you go, okay, well, I want to give more money away. Well, I'm going to do that, but I'm going to do it when I hit this level or when I get to this security or when I have this thing. No. If again, to go back to verse 17, if God's putting on your heart, then do it. That's your call. And so I think it can also be in relation to that as well. In just in trusting in yourself more than you are in God, and that can go on either side of it. So that's a good question, Corey.
Thanks.
One thing in the middle of that section that I really liked was 15, where it says, "And instead you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that." And listening to the series alongside this with Francis Chan, he puts that in perspective. I like the way he puts that. He's saying that part where it says, "If the Lord wills," that saying in that context, it keeps God's sovereignty above our desires.
Mm-hmm.
So it just refocuses the request, kind of like what I was saying earlier, refocuses it to, God is ultimately in control. So, this is something that I would love to have, but you're in control, God. So if in your sovereignty you decide that that's the right move for me, if the Lord wills, then make it so.
Yeah. Thanks, K Unit. I appreciate it, man. Yeah, and I think that, when James is specifically speaking of people boasting, right? I mean, that's kind of that section. So what are some ways that we boast, maybe just as humans, maybe not you specifically, about the future that ultimately is giving the idea that we're relying on ourselves rather than on God? And that may be that, I've got a great 401k built up, or man, you should see the way I'm running the stocks, or like, I think that, and maybe it's not, maybe it's more a rhetorical question, but it's this idea of self-reliance, right? That he's kind of attacking that mindset of, no, you're not promised, like Brandon said, you're not promised tomorrow. So it's whatever God wills. It doesn't mean we don't plan. It doesn't mean we don't prepare. It doesn't mean we don't dream and we don't have ideas of what we can do and try and take advantage of the things that God lays before us. But it also means don't go, like Ryan said, I'll get to that in 2 years. No, like,
Yeah.
you don't have control of that.
Yeah, I going back to what you're saying, like, let's say I get a raise from work and I tell Sarah about it. I'm really excited. I got a raise. I'm like, I did all this hard work. I got to these milestones. I did extras, all this good stuff, and they're recognizing me, rewarding me for all that kind of stuff. And I'll tell my wife that. She's like, well, did you thank God for it? And I was like, no.
Right now I am. Yeah. Yeah.
Give me
Yeah.
a second, okay? I was getting there.
I'll be right back.
Yeah. No, I think it's good. That's really good. I can remember specifically. So when my wife went back to work full time, our income obviously went up, right? So she's a teacher, and so our income went up, and we were giving to the church at the time. But this was going to be something that was going to be like, okay, when this money comes in, we've got bills we got to pay, like some debt we got to pay off and all this sort of stuff. And I'm spending all of this money, right? But I'm spending all this money. And I felt God pretty clearly go, hey, you really need to increase what you're giving to me. And again, we can have a whole conversation about tithing and giving money to God. But the whole point of it is in the New Testament is that we give faithfully and that we give sacrificially as a way to trust God, right? That He is going to provide for us. And so thank you guys for the follow. And so to me, it was oh gosh, okay, before I do anything, I need to up our giving to the church several $100s to get us to where I know we need to be, where I feel like this is what God has called us to give. And so I need to do that first rather than going, okay, I'll get there in 6 months. No, I need to do that now, show that I'm trusting in God, and then let Him take care of all the other things that we need to do. Does that kind of make sense?
Mhm.
So that's something for me practically that has made a part of that. So that's good. All right. Hey, let's move on to
think
chapter 5.
sometimes-
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just saying, I think sometimes for us, it's just the spiritual well-being of my family. Just in
That's
general,
good.
just putting that off or putting other things above it or whatever it is, whether that's going to church or it's praying at night.
I really wish
however that
you would
manifests.
stop convicting me through the Holy Spirit with your words. So God, I'm so ready to move on, and then you just you're right. No, that's so good, man. As parents of kids, it is hard.
Easy.
It is so easy,
Mhm.
like you said, to just go, we'll deal with it next week or next month. So
There you go.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
good. And
They're not going to remember.
dang. Okay, let's move on before I feel any more conviction. Leave the stream and go wake my kids up and talk to them about God. Okay, so chapter 5, warning to the rich, patience and suffering, and prayer of faith. What stood out to you guys? What was kind of some key things that you felt like God was showing you in this last chapter of James?
Some of it stood out was just how harsh it was.
Ooh, yeah, those first 6.
All the silver corroded,
Yeah.
and their corrosion will be evidence against you and will eat your flesh like fire.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Verse 3 does hit a little hard, doesn't it?
Harsh words.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I looked up what Lord of Sabbath, I guess is how you pronounce that.
Okay, so give me a verse.
Let's see. Where was it?
Oh, I'm in the ESV. It's Lord of Hosts. It's verse 4, I think. The end of verse
Okay.
4.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I was maybe reading a different
Yeah.
version, but anyways, in mine it was called Lord of Sabaoth.
Yes.
Not to be. I that was, I don't know, like the Sabbath, but it's not.
Right.
Translation, Hebrew term for Lord of Hosts, which means the Lord of Armies, especially in the sense of heavenly and angelic armies. It describes God as the warrior, the commander-in-chief of all heavenly armies. And I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, because it's interesting because, based on what he says, right? So verse 4, behold the wages of laborers who mowed your fields, which you kept back by fraud, crying out against you, and the cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the lords of hosts, the Lord of armies. Right? It
Yeah.
gives this picture, like you said, of this powerful and armed Lord who is going to fight for, right? The people that are crying out to him that he's hearing are those that you are oppressing. And what was it, chapter 2? I think he talks about, the people that you oppress, maybe chapter 3, but and he is making it very clear that
Yeah.
you are going to be judged harshly, because God is a God of the widows, of the orphans, of the the people that can't fight for themselves.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That's good. And then verse 5, he goes on, you have lived on the earth in luxury and in self-indulgence. You have fattened your hearts in a day of slaughter. You have condemned and murdered the righteous person. He does not resist you. Okay. That is,
All
that
right.
is, that is hard. Yeah. And okay, so general question. All right. I want honest answers. Do you guys view yourselves as rich? And I don't want your church answer. I want what you actually view yourself as rich.
That's an easy answer for me. No.
Right? Right?
And I think one of the evidences of that is we're just now getting to a point. Not, I had a question for you about the tithe thing.
Yeah.
10%, whatever it is, but we're just getting to a somewhat point where that's not eating away at us,
Yeah.
and it doesn't hurt as much as it used to be able to do that. But yeah, I definitely. I see. I'm in the other. Well, my mentality always goes to kind of like what I was talking about. Where was it? I wish I could have like the indulgent lifestyle that it's so common that you see around where we are in Texas and North Texas, and it just seems to be everywhere. So again, with the envy, that's where I feel like I get hit in the face constantly that I'm not in that position.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to break free of that.
Yeah. What about you, Ryan? What about you, Corey? And by the way, none of us are making like hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. So like, let's just state that right off the bat. Like we're all young, have families. I think Corey, does Sarah work?
Yeah.
Okay. So our wives are the two that like have full-time, because Angela doesn't work full-time. Does she now? Or does she now?
Not full time.
Yeah. Yeah. So like Corey and I are the only ones that have wives that work full-time. So like, yeah, in some senses we are not, but how do you guys view yourselves?
So are we talking like earthly rich
Yeah.
wealth or
Yeah.
yeah. I'd say we do a really good job of having a budget and sticking with that budget and
Okay.
living below our means and having good like a financial safety net.
Yeah. So you wouldn't consider yourself
Um,
rich, but maybe comfortable?
I would say I
Okay.
definitely a lot more comfortable than like I don't know.
Where you've been.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. No, that's good. That's
Yeah.
good. What about you, Ryan?
No, I think the same as Corey. I think, I mean, it kind of depends on the moment though too, right? Like,
Yeah.
I think there are times when I consider not myself like super rich or anything, but rich in the sense of context of it area of town I'm in or
Right.
people I'm around or whatever. Like just circumstantially consider myself rich, and then circumstantially consider myself very poor. Like it just kind of
Right.
I don't know that there's one common theme. Like I think with Corey, it's there's more comfort now than there has been in the past, and stuff like that. But it definitely does. And I let that feeling depend too much circumstantially. I think one way or the other.
Yeah. That's good. Well, and I think, and the whole reason I'm asking is, I think that sometimes we can read this passage and we think about people that we know who are rich, right? Because we all know people who are way wealthier than us. And that I think that sometimes we think about those people, and so we don't challenge ourselves with this passage. So I want to come at it from both sides. That number one, that because we have access to healthcare, because we have access to clean water, because we have access to a vehicle and a job and food, that we are in less than point, like, what is it? We're in the point, less than 1% for sure. But
Tiny,
it's, yeah, I think it's like, I know we are in the top 1% of the world, and we're actually in like the 0.3% of the world, just because we have access
Yeah.
to all this stuff. So on one sense, we are very rich, and I think that God will hold us accountable for what we do with that, which we'll talk about in a second, Brandon, because I do want to know your question. And then two, but on the other side, we can also look at ourselves and go, okay, there is more that we could have, and so I want to have the right mentality, so that I'm not, if God blesses and opens the right doors, and we end up getting more money, whether that's through job or through family or through whatever, what am I going to do with it, right? Because on one hand, I am rich, and on the other, I'm not, in kind of comparison to the area. So I think the whole point of this thing is to go, again, kind of coming off the end of chapter 4, he's talking about self-reliance, right? That these people are trusting in their own wealth, in their own resources over God. That's where the problem lies. It's not that the Bible never says that having money is the problem. The Bible says that the love of money is what is evil, right? That it's not, that Paul talks about in his letters how thankful he was for people that had wealth that were able to fund and give and support the ministry that he's doing. 3 John speaks to that John is encouraging those that have wealth to give to the mission that God's called them to do. This God puts people in positions where they make money so that they can turn around and give. But that's the whole point, is that money is not treated as if it is their own and their own doing, but to give out as a part of it. So what I wrote in my Bible is, the problem isn't wealth, it's what we do with the wealth that God gives us. And that's kind of the mindset that I want to have, is what do I do with what God has given me, right? I have a beautiful house. We just got a new house. Okay, we talked about this leading up to this, that I feel like God has given us this house at a price that we can afford to be used for his sake, and to be used for foster care, and to be used for hospitality, and to be used for all these different things. So I need to do that. And if I'm not doing that, to go back to verse 17, if I know what's right and I don't do it, then it's sin. And so, I think that that's part of it. So, all right, Brandon, what's your question on
So it's
tithing?
kind of a two-part question.
Yep.
One, just your thoughts on the 10%
Mm-hmm.
that always gets thrown around, and then the second part of the question is, do you feel like that is intended to be for whatever church community you're a part of, that's where that is supposed to be dedicated towards, or we'll leave it there for
Yeah.
now.
Yeah. No. Okay. So the 10%. So the 10% is an Old Testament command, right? And that is there. So we don't live under the Old Testament law. We live under the new law through Christ, which is talked about in Paul's letters, and especially in Romans, and that Jesus just commanded to give, and to give faithfully. And so I think, so for me, so now I'm going to go practically, right? So for me, 10% is the number I want to reach. It doesn't matter. There have been times where I've hit 10%. There have been times where I haven't hit 10%. 10% is the number that I wanted to reach as a part of what I was giving to my local church. Okay. And so kind of two parts of that. Number one, if you're not giving anything, then come up with something to give. The whole concept of giving, and we get this from the Old Testament, and again this carries into the New Testament, is that God wants us to give back so that we rely on him, and that we put our faith in him and our trust in him. So in the Old Testament, they would lay out crops and would harvest those crops for 6 years. And on the 7th year that God said, no crops, that you will take a year off and not do any sort of planting, any sort of anything. Now, why did he do that? Not because God needed a break from providing for the Israelites, right? It was actually that he wanted them to trust him. He wanted them to save their resources, but then he wanted them to trust him, and to go, okay, it is only because of God that we have what we have. And because he knew that once their mind got off of him, that they were going to start to fall away, and there's going to be disorder, there's going to be chaos, and there's going to be this lawlessness. And it's what we see in the Old Testament, right? As soon as they turn their hearts away from God, just things begin to fall apart quickly. So kind of in the New Testament part, I think that that's what, again, Jesus points a lot to less specifics and more heart, right? And so what is your heart to give? If that is, let's say 10% is $1,000 of your monthly kind of salaries in your house, right? Maybe you can only give $100 a month right now, but you're not giving anything. Giving something is better than nothing. And what I tell people is give until it's uncomfortable. And uncomfortable might be $25. Uncomfortable might be $100. Uncomfortable might be $1,000. Uncomfortable might be not 10%, but 15%. Give until you are having to trust God. And the example we get is Jesus with when he has the disciples, and we see the elderly woman who gives one coin, right? And he talks about her faith versus the rich. Well, so if you look at that, obviously she was giving everything she had, as Jesus said, right? So she was giving a significant amount, but it wasn't that the rich weren't giving the right number; it was their hearts, and it was that they weren't having to trust the Lord. They were just giving, right? Ananias and Sapphira, in the New Testament, they sold their land, but they didn't give the best. They stored away some for themselves and then just tried to give as a facade to show that they were faithful. That when we do that, that's when it's not trusting in God. So it's that point of, at what number does it require you to trust God to go, okay, God, I don't know how you're going to do this every month. And we're not like giving 5,000 of $10,000 every month, to where it doesn't make sense, but that we're giving an amount. And I believe that amount first goes to the local church. Okay. And then once you're giving faithfully in a good number to the local church, again, my number is kind of 10%, then I want to start praying, and I'm gonna go, okay, God, I've got some extra resources and I want to give a little bit more. Where do I give that? And from there, that can be to missionaries. We've got some missionaries in our church that raise money as individuals for their mission work. It can be, that's what it's speaking about in 3 John is supporting those people that are out doing the work of God. It can be to a mission organization. It can be, to something. It can be putting away money and then giving it to one-off things, or to a food pantry or things like that. So the first call is to give to the local church. Those are the people that you should have the closest connection with, that you are supporting, the people who are ministering to you the most, right? So that's kind of your local community. And then from there, give to a point that you go, okay, what else can we give? What else can we do, and where do we want to do that? And maybe that's upping the number that you give to the local church. Maybe your local church is struggling financially, and you need to up it an extra $100 a month. So does that make sense? You have more questions after
No,
that?
it does. It does. I was just curious on your thoughts, because like for us, like I said, it's been a journey to get to, a 10% or where we want it,
Yep.
where we ideally want it to be. And it's still kind of that, trusting that that's going to be available and that God's
Yeah.
going to, provide that for us. But there's also like missionaries and individuals overseas that we personally know outside of the church that we'd also like to give to. So I've always just felt conflicted of, I'm not giving, that whole thing to the local church, the church community that we're part of, but because I also want to do this, but there's just no way I can do both.
Right.
And so
Right.
it's just been kind of this internal conflict of like, is that the right thing?
Yeah.
Is it okay?
Yeah. Well, and then again, I would be
I would say
careful.
yes.
Yeah. Let me be careful, because I think that is then a specific prayer between you and God to go, okay,
Yeah.
Lord, if your church is doing well financially, then maybe you go, hey, can we drop what we're giving to the church a small
And
percent?
it's not dropping entirely. Yeah. Okay. Like a small
Yeah,
percent.
a small percent, to then be able to give
Yeah.
$25 a month to this missionary. Again, I would be really careful of doing that. I would rather you pray, God, will you provide a way for us to give another, again, let's say it's $25 a month. Well, that's $600 in a year, right? Or $550 in a year.
Mhm.
God, we want to give $550 this year, at least $550 this year to this missionary. Can you make that happen? Whether that's through a raise, whether that's through a bonus, whether that's through a tax refund, whatever it is, if you feel that on your heart, that might be what I would pray. And again, it's you do what you feel like God's calling you to do.
Yeah.
But that would probably be what I would pray, is to go, okay, Lord, I want to do this. And it takes the opposite mindset of wealth that, like Corey and I were talking about earlier, that, okay, I want to give more. I want to be more rich. I want to have more wealth so that I can give more. No, God, I want to do this specifically. So when that number comes in and you get an extra check from work or a bonus that's exactly $550 or that is $600, and you go, sweet. Then the faithfulness comes in and the trusting in God to go, okay, Lord, we said we're going to do this, so we're going to give all this money over there. Or maybe it's cut out Starbucks, or something to go, okay, we're going
Yeah.
to sacrifice in this area to give for this reason, and kind of that way. So I think that all of that works. as a part of it. We're kind of doing the same thing of, now that we've kind of got set bills in this new house, it's going, okay, we want to do foster care. We have some missionaries that we're really close with that are trying to raise money. What can we do? Is that $20 a month? Is that $30 a month? Is that $50 a month? What can we do to give to their mission work? Because I think that that's something that God calls us to do too. So,
Yeah.
For,
No, that's
for
good.
us, uh, to, we have a further complication of running a business. Like
yep.
my paycheck and money that comes into the businesses fluctuates, and so it's difficult for us to have a number, just a set number that feels right, or it is a faith-based number, because the conversation that we have to balance is what is the number that feels like we're giving faithfully, but then also being good stewards. And I mean, every dollar we come in has to, it helps facilitate what we do, right? Like if my business doesn't make money for 3 months, I'm eating into savings. So how do I make sure that I protect my family, but also give faithfully to the church at the same time? So like, if I make, a certain amount of money a month, what percent goes to that bucket to protect the family? And then what percent, like,
Yeah.
it's definitely a complicated conversation.
Yeah.
In our house, one thing that we've thought about doing as just a baseline or something is actually looking at last month's expenses and then giving 10% of that, a good percent of that, to say, hey, if you were able to spend that much money, then you should be able to give at least 10% of what you spent,
Yeah.
I don't know, as
Yeah. Well, I think,
some sort of base.
and again, I think the whole kind of biblical teaching side of it is that, God wants the first fruits, right? So he wants you to trust him first. And that, like for you, Ryan, that number may be a moving target every month. And this is where
It is.
I'm going to say something that I have struggled with, and probably even to this day struggle with, is that I want to give faithfully and I want to trust God. And I believe, and I've seen this in my own life, and I could give you examples of, I will, right? So COVID, I was making $15,000 a year as in freelance work. This was work that God just brought up and was allowed my wife to not have to work while we were raising our girls. And then COVID hit, and I lost all of that money on the day. Like it just stopped short, like there. And so we suddenly were like, okay, we don't have, like, I don't know what to do. My wife, who was working part-time, because it was a part-time job with the school district, and the school suddenly went to homes, she wasn't getting paid. So we lost several $1,000s for that. It's like, okay, what are we going to do? Like, how are we going to pay rent? How are we going to do this? And over the next 6 months, that's through our tax refund, through the money that the government gave, through a gift that we got at church as a part of it, that all this money almost to the dollar lined up, even to our air conditioning going out in July. And I'm going, I don't have $6,000. We got our tax rebate, and it was just over $6,000. And I always wait to do it until the summer, our tax refund. And it was like almost to the dollar. And it was just going, okay, God, like you are being faithful. And we continue to give to the church as a part of that time. And that it was just going, okay, Lord, I don't know where it's going to come from. But I'm going to give faithfully, and I'm going to give consistently. And I'm going to trust that you are going to keep us on track, and make do with that. And it's a scary, scary thing, but I truly believe, and I think the Bible teaches this, that those who trust God faithfully, God will bless. May not always be monetarily, but that often in my life, when I give to God faithfully, financially, God comes through in times of need, every time. And whether that's through family, through job, through whatever, there's always some way that he comes through. And so that would be my encouragement, is to go where you feel like God is leading. And if you feel like you're playing it safe, then I would really say, man, I'd pray more about that, which again, it kind of my own convictingness to go, okay, I just did our stuff, spent 2 hours working through our new budget, our new stuff tonight. Okay, I really think we should give money to these missionaries. And I just, like, I was ready to do it right before we got this house. Man, it doesn't mean I shouldn't be able to do it. And these numbers are lining up to where I think I can still do it. I don't know that it's a good idea because once I started, I don't want to stop it. That's way worse. That's that I just feel like, okay, Lord, I think you're making the numbers come together that I need to keep doing this. I need to keep pursuing this. So, yeah. So I think that you're there, but I would
I think for,
do what?
I think for us too, it's reminding ourselves of the conviction to do it, because like for us, every dollar hurts somewhat
Yes.
because
Yeah.
it is unclear what the future is with,
Yep.
running a business stuff like. And so like we have to get, like, it's not like what make, give until it's like uncomfortable. That's all uncomfortable.
Right.
so we
right,
have
which is
to-
good.
Yeah, which is good. But then the convicting part of that is like, yeah, but that thing you bought at Best Buy, or that you just played
Mhm.
golf, like that
Right.
wasn't uncomfortable.
Right.
Why is this?
Right.
That's the
Right.
convicting
Yeah.
that like we
Yeah.
have to work through.
Which is
Good.
why which is really why I would encourage you to figure out that number you want to give. Like, and again, I'm not your Holy Spirit, so you do what God's calling you to do. I would look back at your expenses. I would look back at your expenses to figure out what you can kind of flex and do, and then give that number early. And then how I might do it is go, okay, over the last 12 months, this has been a low month. So what can we do here? So how our church works
Right.
is we give 10% of everything that comes into missions. So if our budget is like $900 something thousand this year as a church, right? So 10% goes to missions. Well, every year for the last 8 years I've been on staff, we have ended the year slightly above giving over budget. So like we've brought in, people have given a little bit more than what we've asked for budget. And so 10% goes to it. So if you go, okay, this is our number that we're going to give, and then anything that we make this month due to projects and whatever, it comes above that, we're going to then give an extra 10% of that number on top of what we're already giving. I think that is a really healthy way so that you have a baseline number, and then any way that God
Right.
blesses above that, you go, okay, Lord, we have this extra, we have this extra $1,000 or $5,000 or whatever this month. Before we spend anything, we're going to give an extra 10% or 15, 5, whatever that number is for you guys. But I would do a baseline number. That's how we do it at church. I would do a baseline number, and then I would go, okay, if anything comes in above that, and just set that number now with Angela, 10%, sweet, whatever that percent is. And then as soon as that monthly comes in, you add that to your tithe as a part of it. So yeah,
I like
I
that.
like that.
good. Listen, James not even talking about money. Well, I guess he's talking about money, but not specifically that part of it. So, okay, good. What else kind of stood out? We got patience and suffering. We got prayer, faith. What else kind of stood out to you guys?
Yeah, patience is hard.
What? Like the definition of the word, I feel like. Hey, and by the way, anybody watching on a stream, if you have questions, throw them in. We love to talk about things that you guys are interested in talking about as well. So I know we got a lot of new follows. I appreciate it tonight, but throw in questions you might have as well. Patience is
I like
hard.
the analogy of basically where he's talking about the farmer. The farmer can't make it rain, right? So I mean, he has to be patient. There's nothing that he can do to cause the rain, and yeah, that's just difficult though. It's difficult to have that patience when something's completely out of your hands or out of your control, and just sit there and wait.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was, I found somebody broke it down that, talking about the farmer and his patience, breaking it down like how the farmer views it versus how we should also view it in a Christian sense. Like, he waits with a reasonable hope and expectation of reward. He waits a long time. He waits working all the while. He waits depending on things out of his own power with his eye on the heavens. He waits despite changing circumstances and many uncertainties. He waits encouraged by the value of the harvest. And there's just a whole list of these. And I thought that was pretty interesting how he called out farmers and their patience.
I think the one thing you said in that is working while he's working all the while. I think that's probably one of the most important aspects of being patient is not passively being patient. Like you
Mhm.
still put in the work necessary of whatever it is. If you're waiting for God to move in a certain area, it doesn't mean you just make those requests and kind of okay, it's on you now. If
Denial.
just
Yeah.
waiting, you still have to continue to dig into those and work in those and just wait for God to act.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really good. And I think sometimes that God waits for us to be faithful in those moments before He will come through with the next thing, right? It goes back to James 1, right? That consider all joy, my brothers, when you face trials of various kinds, right? So if you think about the farmer, there are lots of trials in farming, droughts and poison or bugs or things like that. But the testing of your faith produces steadfastness in its full effect, that you'll be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. That he's been speaking a lot on that throughout the book. So that's really good. For me, verse 12, and this is kind of an Old Testament thing that James is kind of mirroring here, but he says, above all brothers, above all my brothers or sisters, do not swear either by heaven or on earth or by any other oath. Let your yes be yes and your no be no, so that you may not fall under condemnation. In the Old Testament, it spoke really harshly to oaths that we place, that we speak an oath in God's name, or that when we swear by things, that God holds us accountable, even if it's between person to person, that God holds us accountable for those things. And that again, it's like a random. This is why it's summarized sometimes in a book of Proverbs. Like there's just a random little thing in here as a part of that. But that when I tell people I'm going to do something, do I do it? And do I do it well? And I think that sometimes that's convicting for me as a part of it. So. All right, what else stood out? Rest of chapter 5, anything?
The part where he's talking about Job. First of all, it's kind of silly, but I think it's cool whenever you're reading a book of the Bible and it actually references another book of the Bible. I don't know. I always thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah.
That's not what I was trying, but anyways, going off of that, when he's talking about Job, do y'all know who Charles Spurgeon is?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I don't know. I found this quote that he was talking about specific about this verse and the intent of the Lord in reference to Job. He said, if a man were to attack me with a knife, I would resist him with all my strength and count it a tragedy if he succeeded. Yet if a surgeon comes at me with a knife, I welcome him both. I welcome both him and the knife. Let him cut me open even wider than the knife attacker, because I know his purpose is good and necessary. Speaking as, God is, he might cut you open, but it's good and necessary.
That's good.
It's not ill intent. It's not to do you harm. It's actually to do good.
That's good. That's really good.
I also liked him referencing Elijah and making the statement that, would you say, Elijah was a man with a nature like ours, essentially saying he was no different than we are. He had the same access to God that we do, and one of the things that he was able to accomplish because of his faith and reliance on God to do those things, there's no reason why we can't do that as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and a nature like ours, I mean, he has sinful nature. Like he was just as flawed as we were.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And the Bible doesn't hold back on some of his flaws. Well, and I see that again to kind of go back to verse 5 in chapter 1 of, if any of you lack wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all those without reproach, and it will be given to him. But let him ask in faith with no doubting, for the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea that's driven and tossed about by the wind. And it's kind of the same thing of when we pray with faith, pray with confidence. I think that for me, that's something that at my current church, God is I don't know how deep I want to get into this. That's something that I feel like that's God has really kind of challenged me with, and something that we come, I think at least the four of us do, from more traditional theological kind of backgrounds. So you kind of, if you got a spectrum of things, we kind of come from more traditional side, and you got more charismatic people, all the way out, Assembly of God, and all the way out to like Pentecostal type, on the far end of the charismaticness. And one of the things that I feel like God has challenged me the most in is that some of my traditional kind of conservative theology hasn't given God the power that he actually has. And so I now pray with confidence that he can do something. And so I pray for God, as my dad just had this open heart surgery this week, and I prayed for God to heal my dad, and I prayed for God to save my dad, and I've prayed for God, my dad's cancer battle. I've prayed that God would heal my dad. And I know that he can, and there's always this balance of, kind of in this, and then again, I'll teach through it, probably Tuesday, but kind of in this section of scripture that's, he's talking about praying, and the prayer of faith will save the one who is sick, and the Lord will raise him. In Proverbs, we see things that there's, sometimes it's not always a promise. It's a good thing that you want to do, but it doesn't mean that it's a promise. And so, it talks about in Proverbs that those who discipline their children that they'll be raised up and not walk away from the Lord or from they do though. It's not a promise. It's just, it's a good practice to have, because it does give the best opportunity for that. And so the Bible's clear that sometimes we don't have because we don't ask, but that we also should ask in God's will. And I've been going through so many different Bible things. So I don't know if it was in James that he says that we're talking about the will of God, or in Mark where we've been going through a church or what. But the general idea is that I want to pray in faith and in confidence that God can do it. And I want to pray according to his will, that if he chooses to do it, that he will. And that I'm praying because I know he can, not because I know that he will, but I'm praying because I know he can. I think that's the prayer of faith that James is talking about here, is that we pray confidently because we trust God and we know that he has the power to do something.
Yeah, I like that. And I think an important part for me to always remember is that when he doesn't, then I need to really evaluate where my alignment is with his will, and if I'm misaligned, if I'm truly coming in that mindset of, I know that God, I know that you're able to do this, I know that you can do this, I pray that you will do this. But again, like we said, he's sovereign over all, and so if he chooses not to, that's where I'd take that self-evaluation of like, I really thought you were going to do that, but maybe I'm just not seeing what you have in store, and I'm not seeing your plan right now.
But okay, and yes, but I wouldn't necessarily say that you weren't praying according to his will. I think that there's a difference in praying in hope and in confidence. And what I have found is sometimes my problem is that I would always like caveat my prayers to go, but if you don't want to, God, that's okay, right? And I feel like that what I feel like he's challenged me with is to go, no, pray for me to do something. Now, underlying that, God knows my heart. And so faith, if we look at spiritual disciplines, faith for me is super high. I trust God because I just trust God. It comes very natural for me. It comes very easy for me. It doesn't for a lot of people. It doesn't for pastors on my staff, for some of them. For me, it just comes very naturally and very easy for me. So when I pray, and there are times I say this to God, but when I pray, I'm praying for God to do something. Because, and specifically with my dad last summer, when we didn't know if he was going to die or if he was going to lose his arm, man, I prayed that God would save my dad. And I did not know if he was going to answer that prayer in the way that I wanted that prayer. But my prayer was literally, God, you tell me to pray the things of my heart. And so I'm asking you to do this. And I'm pleading and begging you to save my dad. And you know that I trust you if you don't, but I'm going to ask you to do it. And that's how I prayed. Now, had my dad died, or the reality is, I will continue to pray that because my dad's cancer will come back again. And at some point, cancer will probably take my dad's life. I'm going to keep praying that prayer. When my dad does pass away, where I know that where I would say the difference is from what you said, Brandon, is that I'm gonna be disappointed because God didn't answer my prayer, and that's okay. But I'm not gonna not trust Him in that moment. I'm gonna
Yeah.
trust that this was still a part of God's will and God's timing and God's design. And while that hurts, I'm gonna trust that. And so that to me is where I go, okay, I know I'm aligned with His will because I'm still trusting Him as a part of it. And I think that specifically with Job, that's the difference, right? That I know Job prayed for God to relieve some of this, but God didn't. But Job didn't not trust God because of that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes
So
sense. That makes sense.
I think that's the way I would kind of word it as a part of that.
Yeah, I think just maybe talk on that too. When I read the last section of this chapter, and then especially with it coming just after the patience and suffering, a lot of times. So I think a lot of times when I pray for God to answer a prayer or do something, whatever, I think more often than not the answer is not yet. It's neither a yes or no. It's just more patience, and I think that's a lot of times what the answer is just not yet, or have more patience, or it's not the right time or whatever. But I also think there are times when I pray and ask God to do a certain thing, or to whatever it is, and the prayer is answered, but it's answered in a way that I didn't define the answer as being, and it looks different than what my answer I was praying towards looked like. And I think a lot of times I have to, like, rather than saying, am I out of God's alignment, or am I misaligned in the will of God? It's not so much that, it's just understanding where my heart is when I'm praying, like understanding that God does answer the prayer just in the way that I couldn't see because I'm not God,
Yeah.
and understanding where that actually does align with what I was praying towards. It just looks different.
Mm-hmm. That's good.
It's just like in
I think-
IT, we have that saying, give the customer what they need, not what they ask for.
Man, that's I feel like that's the one part James accidentally left out
I
in
know.
this thing is something about IT right there. James 5:21. It's just not there. Must have gotten lost in the manuscripts. That's good. That's good. Anything else stuck out in chapter 5? All right, tell me what's something you're taking away from the book of James? What's we kind of been through this whole book over the last month. What is something that you're going to take away from this book of wisdom?
I don't even know if it was covered in the book, but tithing.
Yeah, I'll give you that one because we talk about being rich, so and trusting in God.
Yeah, so that I mean, I've got a whole list of notes that obviously I need to go through later on. But yeah, right now tithing is something that I feel like I need to look at again.
Yeah.
Even though it wasn't covered in this book.
No, I think it's good. I think it's really
Yeah,
good.
I mean, I think that kind of ties into a lot of the themes, though, because I mean, there's the whole section on faith that works, and I think that
Oh yeah, that's true.
falls very closely into tithing. It's just because I think that's what I kind of took away from it too, not in like tithing specifically, but that thought of like faith without works. Like, I can say all the right things, and I can go to the church services, and I can do this stream, and I can do all the things, but like, there's the works that has to follow that up, or it's meaningless.
Yeah, that's really good.
I mean, I think that's probably one of my biggest takeaways. I mean, there were several, but the faith that works. I mean, it's so easy, especially with kids and everything, to just, yeah, we pray at home. We go to church and home group and whatnot. But I mean, yeah, that's works, but it's not like mission works, anything like that. It's just like kind of you get into the routine, and it's like, okay, I'm a Christian in the South, in the Baptist Bible Belt, and doing the Christian thing, and not having that real evidence. Yeah. And not having that real evidence that God is, in my life and working through me to impact others.
That's good. That's good. All right, so mine is going to be. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Ryan.
was just saying, just the outward impact over the inward impact. Like I think that's, yeah.
For me, I think, man, I've thought a lot about this. We talk more about this another time as God continues to give me direction. But chapter 3, verse 1, not many of you should become teachers, my brothers, for you know that we who teach will be judged with greater strictness. That has really been hit close, I think, for me. He's speaking about the tongue and stuff, but specifically just as a pastor and as a leader, that the weight of my job and my responsibility, I forget that sometimes, that I just get busy with the routine of a job, and I forget that my job has a great importance into the lives of people, and that sometimes I think I treat it flippantly, and that's something I don't want to do. And then I think for me, it's chapter 4, what we talked about earlier. Submit yourselves to God, resist the devil, he will flee from you. Draw near to God, he will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, purify your hearts, you double-minded. Be wretched and weep and mourn, let your laughter be turned into mourning and joy to gloom. His specifically the resist the devil, draw near to God. And then the promise is that God will draw near to you. And that's, there's just times I'm not consistent with that. And so I need to do that. So good. Okay. All right. Anything else before we finish out this? All right. Well, hey, gentlemen, I appreciate you as always. We will be back Thursday with the first set of well, may not be a lot of the next book, but it'll be the first set of the next book. And I'll be back on probably Tuesday to stream teaching through 4 and 5, just so we have it. So yeah, cool. All right.
Thanks.
Yeah. All right. Hey, I appreciate all the follows. I appreciate all the follows. I just appreciate all the kind of interaction as a part of this stream. It makes it a blast, and I hope that you learned something. Oh, it got dark as soon as that stuff went off. I hope that you learned something. I hope that you felt like you were challenged in something. Again, I'll be back Tuesday to teach through James 4 and 5. You do ! YouTube. You can see what we've been teaching and what we've been talking about over the last month. You can go to the live streams as a part of that and go back and watch all the YouTube streams that we've had. And that's what we do. Every month we read a different book. This next month we are going to, I'll pull it up really quick if I can find it. We are going to read a book on having a missional mindset, which I think is going to be really good. It's going to be really interesting to have different conversations with different people, a pastor and just different things like that. And so I think it's going to be really good, and I can't find it. So, but anyways, we'll be back Thursday as a part of that and as a part of that study. So again, thank you for hanging out. Thank you for watching on YouTube. Thank you for watching on Twitch. And with that, we will, I think, play a game for just a little bit.